I'm here today with Josh Kirshenbaum, and we are going to be talking about going through divorce when you have children with special needs or disabilities. So, Josh, I'll let you introduce yourself and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Tina. So I'm Josh Kirshenbaum. I'm an attorney in Pennsylvania who is actually a full-time mediator at this point, and I work with families who have kids with disabilities and who are going through divorce. And I work as a divorce mediator. Before this, I was a lawyer. I am still a lawyer, but I was a lawyer who worked mostly with parents who had kids with disabilities and who were going through disputes with their public school districts, special education law, as we would call it. But I moved into this practice of being a mediator, in part to help families, who are in this situation of having kids with disabilities and who are trying to navigate legal systems and working with families who are going through divorce and who have kids with disabilities is a great way to do that.
This is something you've been really passionate about your whole life.
Certainly, my whole professional life. I started out as a public school teacher, worked with kids with all kinds of abilities, disabilities in the public school system, and then became a lawyer after that,
Mhm.
and really kept that as my focus the entire time. So yeah, it's been my whole professional career has been working with families who have kids with disabilities.
Well, so on that note, let's first talk about the terminology, right? So, special needs, disability, that can be a hot button for some people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Language is really important. And the words we use, they land differently with different people. And I've definitely found over the years that, um, you know, different parents have different preferences for what terms and terminologies we use.
Right.
I think that, even in different parts of the country, it's interesting.
Mhm.
It's a regional thing as well. Sometimes people use the term special needs very, very broadly to mean any kind of disability. But in some families and some people, that term means a subset of disabilities. Some people only use the term special needs when referring to learning disabilities.
Right.
Some people really embrace and love the term disabilities, and some people really don't. As far as I'm aware, there's no one term
Oh,
that fits all exactly. And so what I try to encourage people to do is to just be very intentional about um, what terms you're using. Also, listen, to people. If you're talking with families and they're using a particular term and word, listen and maybe reflect that back. What I try to tell people is that when I use the term disabilities, when I use the term special needs, um, I'm I'm referring to a very large tent, very, very large tent, um, as wide as possible, so that what I'm really doing is I'm really trying to help people who have historically been marginalized from the legal system and from other systems, the educational systems. Um, and I'm trying to do this work to help people have access um, to conflict resolution, to have access to the legal system.
right.
So my intention is never to exclude people. It's never to in any way dehumanize or belittle people. It's always to be as inclusive as possible and to help.
Right. And that's something that's interesting, obviously, because going through a divorce is very difficult and overwhelming and changes everything in your life. And then when you add in that wrinkle, right, of additionally having a child who has, whether you want to call it special needs or unique needs or things that need to be considered as part of that process, it adds different stress,
Yes.
right? Different consideration.
Yes. Additional considerations. I have a colleague who really likes to use that phrase, additional considerations. I really like that. But you're right, Tina. I mean, either one, both of these things are labyrinths in and of themselves, right? Being a parent of a kid with disabilities is a labyrinth in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, it's labyrinths within labyrinths, right? It's understanding what your child's needs are, let alone navigating the educational system and the legal system, the medical systems.
Right.
All of those are really complex challenges. And of course, going through divorce in and of itself is a labyrinth, right?
Yes.
There's the legal system.
That is
It's again,
mildly.
to
Yeah.
put it mildly, right? And so actually, one of the images that I have in my head, and I actually use this in some of the materials that I have, is I have these two labyrinths that are overlapping with each other,
Mhm.
right? One is parenting a child with disabilities, and the other is divorce. And then where those two labyrinths kind of interlock and intersect with each other, that's where I sit.
Yeah.
So I really am I'm placing myself right at the center of those two labyrinths, because folks that are in both of those at the same time really need professionals who can help them
Hmm.
kind of get through it, and who appreciate what they're going through and who see the connections and the what's lying ahead. Um,
And who don't
it's
shy away from it as well,
right.
as professionals who really want to be looking for solutions and finding opportunities where we can sort of sync up, rather than just get further apart as parents.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about it as like moving towards these families, not away from them. And, uh, you would hope and you would have thought that there would be a lot of professionals that um, are are willing and interested and feel confident and comfortable being in that space. And there's not a ton.
Yeah.
You're unusual, Tina. um, welcome to the world of being a little unusual. But
Right.
yeah, we are encouraging people to not be afraid.
Mhm.
A lot of very capable professionals are very intimidated by
Yeah.
being in that space. It's a very scary place to be if you don't know your way around.
Mm.
The effect of that is that families that are in that situation find it very difficult to find professionals who really can help them, who really can give them the benefit of professional support that everybody else has when they're going through this.
Right.
So that's why we want to move into this space, not away from it.
No, definitely. So let's talk about divorce rates, right? Families with special needs. Is it generally higher because there are these additional considerations, or is that not the case?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because that there's a myth. Okay. There's a very, very pervasive myth that many people listening to this have heard before. Many people have heard before, and maybe even have said to other people before, that 80% of families, the parents that have kids with disabilities, get divorced. Okay. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this.
Yeah, I have too.
And what I really want to impress upon the people who are listening to this and who are watching this is there's absolutely no evidence that that's true. None. It's not clear where that myth came from,
Mhm.
or when. I tried to figure that out at one point because I was hearing it so often. There was a point in time where I thought it was true just because I had heard it said so many times. So I went and I started to research this, and it is bogus.
Mm.
Um, there's no evidence whatsoever that the divorce rate for parents of children with disabilities is that much higher than the average. Okay, so what do we know? So there's a couple of reasons why we know that myth is bogus. One is almost nobody is actually studying this. Like there are very, very few researchers who are actually looking at this question
Yeah.
about whether having a child with a disability, how does that impact the marriage and the marital outcomes? There are a few very good ones, and the little evidence that we have is that the divorce rate. First of all, the definition of disability matters a lot, right? No two
Right.
people have the same definition of what special needs or disabilities even mean. So when
Right.
someone
How do
makes a
you even
statement like,
quantify? How do you even quantify that?
right, how do you quantify that? Exactly. So nobody's collecting this data and nobody's using the same definitions. So what do we know? We know that for certain studies that have been done, they've looked at, say, for whether having a child with autism, how does that seem to affect marriage? Well, there again, autism even, it's a
Huge
big
spectrum.
spectrum, right?
Right.
So from what we can tell, the there is no strong evidence to suggest that there's a dramatically higher rate of divorce among people who have children with disabilities. The other challenge is this: there's the reality is lots of disabilities are genetic, or at least have a partial genetic component. So um, when we are looking at people who have children with disabilities, in many of those situations, one or both of the parents also does as well.
Yeah.
So nobody's really separating that out as being a factor as to whether that's contributing to um, what's going on with the marriage. The other
Right.
thing is, at least I know this from talking with people. I know many people who are parents of kids with disabilities who have said to me that has made their marriage stronger.
Right.
So every marriage is unique, every family is different, and making broad statements about how having a child with disability will have this outcome on a marriage,
Negative impact
it's,
somehow.
it's just nonsensical. But it's actually worse than nonsense. It really hurts people. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people feel, um, you know, to hear that like that this is somehow threatening my marriage or this makes my marriage weaker. It's just not true in many cases, and I think it makes people feel stigmatized to hear that.
Adding to the stress, right? We talked about this recently, you and I, how isolating it is to go through divorce, right? And then also how isolating it can be when you have a child who has special needs or need, you know, different considerations, however you want to word that, right? It's very overwhelming as a parent. So anything that's adding to that negativity is not really helpful.
Right. It's not helpful. There's already a lot of emotions that are running very high. And just that's just another layer that doesn't need to be there.
Hmm. So let's talk about then, some of the actual decisions when you're going through divorce that are impacted by having a child who has special needs or disabilities. So parenting plans, right? That's kind of the number one thing that comes to mind. How does that influence someone's parenting plan?
Well, parenting plans in all situations are supposed to be based in large part upon what's going to work well for the child, what's going to work well for the family. And if your child, let's give an example. If you have a child with severe autism, and that child has a lot of difficulty with transitions
Mhm.
between activities, between environments, is very set on particular routines, and who may even have a particular schedule with doctors and therapies and things like that, you can easily see how um, getting into a co parenting agreement or a custody agreement that involves now two homes
Mhm.
and the child going back and forth between two homes might not actually be possible.
Right,
Or it might not be possible yet. It might not be possible now. So it will dramatically affect what the child is actually able to do, what they can literally tolerate, how long it's going to take them to adjust and learn a new routine,
right,
and sometimes even how set up are the two homes. If the new home is not modified or it's not doesn't have yet in it what it needs to have for the child, depending on the disability. I mean, I worked on a case recently where the marital home was modified for a wheelchair.
mhm,
The child has cerebral palsy and is in a wheelchair, and the entire home had been modified to be wheelchair accessible. Well, when one of the parents moves out and is starting a new home, that home is not yet
not
wheelchair accessible.
right.
So, a one size fits all, 50-50 custody and the kid's going to split between the two homes, a one size fits all approach just doesn't work in a
Well, and what
situation.
I'm hearing too that you're saying is that parents need to also have a level of patience and understanding that their dynamics maybe are not the same as the neighbor who went through a divorce or someone else because their child needs something different. So just like every other decision they've made to this point for that child's well-being, now we need to maybe, like you said, maybe it's not today, but we slowly transition up into a
Right.
certain time sharing schedule or a certain arrangement, but being
Well,
more
that's a great point.
aware of
Yeah.
what the child needs, not just what the parents can agree to.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, we one of the hardest parts about going through divorce, right, is that all of the other voices, all of the other people who have opinions about what you should do, right? The people whispering in your ear about how it went for them or how it went for their family, whatever, their sister, and your situation is unique.
Mhm.
You don't know what the other people's situation was.
Right.
So, I gave just two examples there, but there's another thing too, which is that it's very common that when you have a child with disabilities, that one of the two parents takes on a greater role in the child's care and routine than the other. Oftentimes, one parent may be out, with full-time employment, and the other parent is less, doesn't have full-time employment, or maybe is just not employed at the moment at all because they're spending a lot of time caring for their child.
Yeah.
And that parent who's been with the child and who's been primarily responsible is a lot more familiar with the care needs of the child,
Routine.
the routines, the educational needs, all sorts of things. And now we have a situation. This is very, very common. it's actually pretty unusual for both parents to be equally involved in all of the aspects of the child's life. It just doesn't happen
I
very
think it's
often.
the case even when your child doesn't have special needs.
That's right. And actually,
Now,
that's
like,
a great point.
elevate that even more and let
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And in fact, I think it's, since you mentioned it, it's worth mentioning is we talk a lot about the differences between what parents with kids with disabilities go through. But the truth is, what you're going through when you're going through the divorce is in some ways the same as what everybody else is going through. It's the same issues, but they're manifesting in somewhat different ways. And they require a more creative and flexible approach
Mm.
to come up with solutions to the challenges. So they're the same set of issues, right? Someone once said to me, like, nobody has special needs. Everybody has the same needs. It's just what it takes to meet those needs is
Mm.
different for different
Yeah.
people. And I actually really agree with that.
No,
I
definitely.
do.
Right.
Children with special needs have the same needs as everybody else, but what it's going to take to meet those needs might be different. So
Yeah, I love that.
when you're going through divorce, right now you're talking about two homes, right? And the parents not co-parenting together in the same space. And
Mhm.
so now we have an issue. This comes up all the time of what used to be the responsibility of one parent to care for the child is now going to have to be done by two. And
Mm.
that other parent is going to have perhaps not had as much experience doing it. And this leads to two problems. One is two challenges. One is that new parent has to now learn
Yeah.
how to do it. And for some situations, we're talking about there are kids who are very medically fragile, who have special medical equipment, special medication, special protocols for seizures and things like that. The other parent may actually have to learn how to care for the child.
Mhm.
But then the other scenario is that the parent who has been the primary caregiver is going to have to give up time and control over that. And that's incredibly scary.
Very, very difficult for them.
Very difficult, very scary. And that is something that a mediator has to be very aware of and very sensitive to, and a co-parenting coach would as well.
Right.
That, what are the care needs of the child and to what extent have both parents been involved before or not?
I think there's also this need, and this might be putting it bluntly, but I say this to clients sometimes as well who, we're not talking about special needs. We're just talking about in any case, right? There needs to be a realism, a reality check by both parents of what can I actually do and handle? Because sometimes there's what you want to do on paper, and then there's the reality of your work schedule and, the responsibilities that you have there. And maybe it would be better for the child to spend more overnights with the other parent who has a more flexible schedule and can tend to those needs, right? So I feel like it's even more amplified in these cases because we need to not just look at ourselves and our own desires and our well-being, but what's best for the child given the reality of our circumstances, not like the perfect on paper picture.
You're right. And, many times people come to mediation having already talked about that. I mean, they're very aware of their situation. They know, they've done the math. They realize I work full time. How am I going to do this? And either they've acknowledged that they can't, or they have some other idea in mind about how it's going to go.
Mhm.
But that has to be talked about. And you're right. I mean, that requires a great deal of flexibility in thinking. It requires a commitment, a focus on the child's needs,
Yeah.
right, and a willingness to be vulnerable enough to talk about the reality. So we do a lot of what we call reality testing in mediation. You do this too, I'm sure,
Mhm.
as a coach, where we ask people, okay, so let's describe how that's going to go. Let's think that through. How's this going to go? And we do that without judgment because the truth is we don't know.
No.
It
Perfect.
might strike us as being crazy, but it may work quite well for that family.
Yeah, 100%.
I've certainly had people come to me to describe what their co-parenting arrangement is, and it seems unusual to me, or I can't imagine doing it, but it's working for them,
Yeah.
and that's what's important, and that's why it's so important to be in a process that keeps you in control,
Mhm.
that keeps the parents in control of the outcome. That's why I'm such a big proponent of mediation as a way to go through divorce when you have a child with disabilities, because anything that gives you, as the parents, control over the outcome and the ability to be flexible and creative will only help. You would never want to be turning over to a stranger, a judge,
Right.
all of these decisions about the complex needs of your unique family. That's the last person you would want to be deciding that.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of times people have this mindset, and I say this is not related to just this topic. This is anybody going through divorce, right? Has this idea sometimes that I'm going to go to court, I'm going to give my spiel, and the judge is going to see my side of it, and I'm going to get all the things I want, right? And that's just not how this process works.
No.
Judges are extremely limited as to what they can do. So they have to go by sort of the textbook, right? They can't deviate a ton. They have to really stay within a certain framework. And so when you're talking about a family that's got children with extremely unique needs and considerations and, doctor's appointments and medications and things that are happening on a daily basis, potentially, the idea of turning that over to a person who has absolutely no knowledge intimately of your family, I hope would maybe scare the people more than losing the control, right? Like a little bit of control, because you're losing either all of it or you're coming to an agreement where you maybe have to relinquish a little bit of it. But isn't that the better option than having to give away all of it to a complete stranger? Like that's
Well, I think the first step is knowing that you even have a choice in that. Like a
right.
lot of people don't even
Well,
realize that they don't have to go through court to do this,
that is true.
right? But you're right. I mean, you have to break it down. A lot of people do have that idea that I'll go to court. I know I'm right. The judge will see that. But what they're not totally thinking about is the only way to really do that is to go with a lawyer.
Mhm.
And the only way to do that is to hire the lawyer. And when
Mhm.
you hire a lawyer, you're paying that lawyer by the hour, which is when you're dealing with lawyers, you're really talking about by the minute,
Right. Yes. And
literally
it increments usually, right?
6 minute increments. But guess what? Newsflash, it's a 6 minute increment is a tenth of an hour, but they round up,
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm telling you this. I am a lawyer. I used to be a lawyer that billed by the hour. I know how this works. The point is that if you're doing everything through the lawyer, which is what you're going to have to do, you're paying a lot of money
Mm,
just for a chance to spin the wheel. You're not guaranteed any outcome.
no.
Anything that you think, even if you're right legally, even if you think you're right legally, even if you think you have the best case in the world, you're still going to have to pay a lot of money to even make the argument to the judge,
Mhm.
and then hope that they agree with you, and to know that if they don't agree with you, you're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
The problem, of course, is that a lot of people don't they are not so sure that they have any other alternative to that. They may, as terrible as that sounds, they say, well, of course I don't want to go to court. Of course I don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a lawyer, but we have to. And sometimes that because we have, but we have to is because they feel that their spouse is not somebody that they can communicate with, that they could negotiate with, or that they could, let alone mediate with. They have it in their minds that you have to be getting along really well with each other to be able to mediate. And that's not true. So a lot of people don't even consider alternatives to this because they don't know that they exist, or they feel that those are not for them.
So then let's talk about for families who are going through these challenges, right? What would be an alternative to litigation? So we talked about mediation. There's another process, obviously, called collaborative divorce. I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what that means because of the word choice,
Sure.
right? The term collaborative. Yeah, sure. Of course, I want a collaborative divorce. I want to get along,
Right.
try to not, argue as much, but it's actually a process
Yes.
of how people get divorced. So
Yes.
maybe you can explain it just briefly.
And in fact, I'm trained as a collaborative attorney, and I'm a member of my local collaborative practice group, and so yeah, I can. I guess it helps to zoom out and sort of look at the big picture first, and then to sort of zoom in on this. But basically, when you're going through divorce, you have a choice of the process that you go through. So every divorce starts and ends exactly the same way, right?
Mhm.
Every divorce starts with the decision to get divorced
Yes.
by one or both of the people, right?
Yeah.
And every divorce ends with a judge issuing a divorce decree
Mhm.
that makes you divorced. But how you get from A to Z, you have a choice.
Mhm.
So those choices break down basically into two categories. There's one set of processes where other people are making decisions for you. And then there's another set of processes where you guys are making the decisions yourself.
Mhm.
So we've talked about the one where other people are making decisions for you. That's litigation. That's when judges are making decisions for you and you're using lawyers to make arguments to those judges.
Right.
We've talked about that. In the category of you're still in the driver's seat, there were really two big ones. One is mediation, which we've talked a little bit about, where the spouses work with one neutral facilitator, a mediator, who is not their lawyer, is not giving them legal advice, is not taking sides, is not making decisions, but is facilitating the conversation between the two spouses and helping them reach their agreements. Okay, that's mediation.
Mm-hmm.
Collaborative divorce, we call it big C collaborative divorce because you're right. It's not little c, we're just being cooperative with each other.
Right, yeah.
Big C collaborative divorce is a process, and it's most states right now, including Florida, including Pennsylvania, where I am, and many other states, have passed laws that allow for a special type of way to get divorced called collaborative divorce. And what it entails is this. With collaborative divorce, the spouses do work with attorneys. They each have their own attorney that is absolutely their attorney, represents them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Full on is your attorney. But the attorneys are trained in this special process that I'm going to describe, which is based on the idea that we want to help people, support people through the divorce process without going to court, without litigating in court. So you have these two lawyers, each of whom is trained in this process, and the four of you, both spouses and both lawyers, sign an agreement together called a participation agreement. A participation agreement says we are officially entering the collaborative divorce process. And what that means is we are going to resolve your dispute without going to court, without litigating. And if you decide that you do want to go to court, you have to find new lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to go to court for you. We're not going to represent you in court.
And the reason that matters is because, well, two reasons. Number one, now you've paid the retainer and whatever hours you spent on that lawyer and potentially have this threat of having to start over, right? So that
That's right.
people really,
That keeps people honest, right? It keeps
yeah,
people in it, and the only people that get into it are people who are willing to do that. Everybody's committed, and the lawyers. This is what's also really interesting. The lawyers are very committed in this process because they have no incentive whatsoever for you guys to wind up in litigation. Because if you do wind up in litigation, it's some other lawyer that's going to get rich off of that, not them,
right.
because they've disqualified themselves from representing you in court. So the first thing about collaborative divorce is the participation agreement. The second thing about collaborative divorce is that it allows for other professionals, not lawyers, but other types of professionals to be on your team.
Mm-hmm.
So you are going to form a team. It's going to include your lawyers, but it's also going to include other professionals, such as a financial neutral, that is like a person who's usually a financial advisor or a tax professional, somebody who can serve as a neutral to help you navigate the financial aspects of your divorce.
Right.
And that person will work with both spouses and with the lawyers to help with all of the financial questions that come up in the divorce. And that person also signs the participation agreement and cannot appear in court or be involved in any court proceedings with you if you wind up there. You might also have a coach, a mental health professional, people who can help the team work through the emotional issues that are coming up during the divorce. So in some ways, there are some similarities to mediation here and some contrast with litigation here that are important for parents who have kids with disabilities. Remember how I said it's really important to have a process that keeps you in control? Well, in collaborative divorce, that's the participants, the clients are still in control of the outcome. You're the ones reaching the agreements. It's voluntary. There's nobody making decisions for you. They're helping you.
Right. Well, and the great thing too with collaborative, because those attorneys are never going to represent either of you in court, there's an openness that you don't normally have at a settlement conference where there's attorneys present, right? Because they can talk very, very frankly with one another about the circumstances, about why their client might have a certain position in a way that they wouldn't if there was potentially going to be litigation in a courtroom, because there's certain things they wouldn't want to disclose to the other side. But with collaborative, there is no other side. It's all one team. And if you're a parent of a child with special needs or disabilities, it's even more important to have a one team approach, because that child, they might need support way beyond what maybe, you might be looking at in a traditional divorce settlement. They may need support past the age of 18. they might need additional considerations that are not textbook, right? And so having that team approach that we're all on one side together, trying to do what's best for our family is, I think, even more important,
It
uh,
is.
traditional divorce.
Yeah, and you're going to need other types of professionals involved.
Mhm.
So, for example, you might need a special needs trust set up so that the money that goes to the child doesn't disqualify them from public benefits. There's a lot of things. The other thing is you are even though there's a lot of professionals involved with this, and it is more expensive than mediation, it's still way less expensive than litigation.
Yeah.
And you're maintaining control over the outcome. And you get the support that you need from all these different professionals. And what's also really cool, this is something that I really like, is if you wanted to have somebody on your collaborative divorce team who had expertise in the area of special needs parenting and special needs law, you could add a consultant to your team.
Hmm.
So it's very flexible. And you're right, all of these people can talk to each other, which you can't do in litigation.
No.
All the information is shared freely with each other. You're voluntarily sharing information. The lawyers can talk to each other because there's a law in their state that allows for collaborative divorce. Those lawyers are allowed to talk to each other in ways that they couldn't if you were not in the collaborative process, big C collaborative process.
Mhm.
So I'm a big fan of the idea of if you are going through divorce and you have a child with disabilities, at the very least, do a consultation with a collaborative lawyer, do a consultation with a mediator,
Yeah.
find out to do them together as parents or separately if you can't do them together. But find out about these processes. It doesn't cost anything to find out the information, and you could wind up saving yourself untold amounts of money and time
Mhm.
just by getting into the right process for you.
And you know what, too? I think with these processes, right? Collaborative mediation, whether you do mediation without attorneys or with attorneys, all of that. The difference, I think, between a litigation setting where the attorney is speaking to for you, right? And talking to each other instead of the clients talking to each other, we're learning again how to communicate in a way that is healthy and for the betterment long term of the children. Because as you know, divorce often stems from dysfunctional communication in the relationship, or something else that happened in the relationship led to issues in the communication. So often when the divorce process starts, that communication can be very fragmented. So these processes are set up to really support parents in learning how to talk to each other again, which is paramount in any co-parenting relationship, but especially, again, when you have a child with disabilities, special needs, additional considerations, or who might need support even longer than maybe most children who need it till age 18. And to be honest with you, even children without additional considerations often need support past age 18
Yeah,
anyways. So that co-parenting relationship, not only does it stay more intact, but you're also really, I think, fortifying it through those processes.
I agree. It's one of the reasons why as a mediator, right, one of the decisions I had to make as a mediator was how am I going to structure my mediation sessions? Specifically, are we going to stay together in the room, all three of us?
Hmm.
Or are we going to break out into these caucusing sessions where I'm talking to one parent, right, one spouse, and then going and talking to the other and kind of going back and forth? And I made the decision at the very beginning of my career as a mediator that I was always going to stay in the room together with both parents at the same time. We're never going to break out into separate sessions. And that's for the reason you just said, because these folks have to be co parents with each other for a long time after this divorce is over. They have to be able to communicate with each other and to have success doing so. And if I can give you a process that shows you that you can have success and create an agreement together by talking directly to each other, then you can take that with you after the divorce is over as a success. And you are much more likely to abide by the agreement that you created because you created it together and it wasn't imposed upon you.
No, that's a big one. I think just making sure that you really take the time to create an agreement that both of you are comfortable with and that really makes sense for your family. And I would say also building in flexibility is more important than ever when you're dealing with having additional considerations for a child. traditionally, right, in the litigation type setting, you have maybe a lot of disputes over the finances, and then the parenting plan gets done, but it's kind of almost like a box that's checked just to kind of, we got to file the parenting plan, we got to come up with a schedule, and that's
Yeah.
sort of the end of it. But when you have a child who's got a lot of ongoing considerations and needs and things that are maybe atypical, having flexibility baked into the parenting plan and viewing it really as more of a tool to sync up and get on the same page as parents and anticipate conflict and try to resolve things ahead of time, be proactive. I think that's even more important than ever, really.
Yeah. You're right. Flexibility, the ability to have agreements that can grow and change as the needs change. Like one of the things is that with many disabilities, um, we don't know what the trajectory is going to be. Are the needs going to change? Are they going to get more intense? Are some things going to get easier? We don't know. And we need to have agreements that strike a balance, right? You need to have some certainty, some predictability, some closure, right? But also the ability to come back together when things change. And through mediation or collaborative, where you're creating the agreements, you can build that into your agreements.
Mhm.
You can build in circumstances under which you're going to come back together and revise and revisit the agreements. And it's extremely important because again, the farther you're trying to predict into the future, this is true for everybody. The farther you're trying to predict into the future, the more uncertain it is, the scarier it is. A lot of the times, what I experience with parents is they're very afraid about the decisions that they're making during the divorce because they feel they're going to have forever consequences,
Yeah.
and they're not in a good position to know what the kids' needs are going to be 10 years from now. Are they going to be independently living? Are they still going to be needing to live with one of us? Will they go to college? Will they get a job? Will they be able to live independently? Will their condition deteriorate and they'll need even more care? They don't know. And the stakes are so high that expecting people to get into forever agreements at that time is nearly impossible. So what
Yeah.
we try to do is we try to help people get into agreements for a period of time and have the ability to come back and revisit them as needed.
Right. So what would that look like? So for example, you would have, let's say every 2 years, we agree to join together in a mediation and talk about issues that we want to change in the parenting plan. What does that look like in some of your?
Yeah, it could be something like that. I mean, it could be as simple as saying that the child support term is modifiable. Now, in most states, it's always modifiable. Child support's always modifiable, but maybe the spousal support or alimony term becomes modifiable. Remember, sometimes what's happening is one parent hasn't been working and is not going to be working because they're
Like,
spending time as a caregiver.
yeah.
But when they divorce, they're going to have to go back to work, and they're that's going to mean that their ability to work might change over time. So maybe the answer is in the first year or two, the support level is going to be this amount. And then we're going to come back and we're going to revisit it. And depending on what the working situation is at that point, it's subject to revision. So it may be something along those lines. It also could be that, if we'll come back together, a year before the child is going to graduate from high school, so we can revisit whether or not we need to talk about college and things like that. It depends on what the needs are of the family, but I think that that's one of the reasons why mediation works so well, why collaborative works so well, is because you might not be able to get people to agree again to a forever agreement, but they might well agree to an interim plan.
Mhm.
And that could be enough to get people, to the next step.
I always encourage people too to just have this mindset of being flexible in general, right? With the agreement, like this is what we're agreeing to today, but let's bake in a proactive review every year and proactively bring up things that we think are not going to make sense anymore rather than waiting until some sort of conflict arises. And now
Right.
we're trying to react, right, to the conflict.
Yeah.
So it's just a
Um,
mindset shift too as to what that document really represents for the family.
yeah. And, this actually ties in with another big issue, right? A lot of times parents don't agree about what the needs are of the child.
Yeah.
And so part of the process of mediating or coaching somebody through a co-parenting situation is that very often the and it can be extreme. Sometimes one parent thinks that the child has a disability and the other parent does not think the child has a disability at all. That's one extreme. And you get sometimes where both definitely recognize that the child has needs, but they don't agree on
How
the
what?
severity or what they are or what we need to do to meet those needs.
Mhm.
Common situation could be one parent has been um, not working full time and caring, doing a lot of care providing to the child, and the other parent is saying, "You don't need to be doing that. He doesn't need all of that. You could be working full time. He could be getting that support from school or whatever it is." They do not see eye to eye about what the child's needs are. And that can be a huge source of conflict, sometimes in the marriage, but certainly during the divorce. And a lot of professionals who work with families who are going through divorce, who have kids with disabilities, say that's the most difficult issue. And it is sort of the defining issue that they see
Mhm.
is disagreement about the child's needs themselves.
Yeah.
So what that means is the divorce mediation process for me, part of that is ascertaining how aligned are the parents even on what the child's needs are. And if they don't align on that, I know that we have to deal with that first.
Mhm.
Because if they don't see eye to eye, or at least close enough on that, then it's going to affect all the conversations about all the other topics in the divorce. Sometimes the answer is they need additional information that they don't have. They need to have an evaluation of the child. They need to have somebody else come in and give them some kind of perspective on what the child might need. Or they might need to try a certain thing out for a period of time, but then be open to revisiting to see how it's going and whether it needs. So, for example, with the situation I told you about with the two homes and one was wheelchair accessible and one wasn't, that kind of thing, or where you have a child who has difficulty transitioning, sometimes they can agree for a period of time that the child is going to remain in one of the homes and the other parent is going to come in to spend time there,
That
but
home.
that they would gradually try to transition. They would start with having the child spend a little bit of time in the other parent's home, and maybe they'll wait until that other home is done getting its revisions and modifications. But the point is they can do a gradual move and then come back together, sometimes even come back to mediation if they want, to
Mhm.
see how is it going and to see if they want to change their agreement, because it's your agreement and you can change
Right.
it.
Well, and the other thing that these processes allow for is also consulting other professionals, like you said. So if there is a dynamic where, we're talking about gradual, step ups in overnights or, whatever it may be, you can involve like the child psychologist or psychiatrist or whoever is caring for them to sort of help guide that conversation. What does that timeline look like? Rather than saying, okay, 2 months of this and then 3 months of that, which we often see in traditional parenting plans, the traditional step up in time sharing over a period of time.
Right.
But with a child who might have different needs, we may not need to look at a certain number of months, but it might be reaching certain milestones that maybe their therapist can help assist with. When do
Right.
we know they're ready for step two?
Exactly.
This is a
And
time that we're arbitrarily throwing at them.
yeah, and what you're pointing out something is that look at the difference between what your divorce process would be if if you have a kid with disabilities and you're working with someone like you,
Mhm.
Tina, who has worked with a lot of other families in these situations or similar situations. The connections that you're making between their child's needs and the different decisions that have to get made in the divorce process, you're able to do that because you've had a lot of experience working with other families in these situations. This is what families need. They need the professionals that they're working with to have had this type of experience, to be thinking this way, to be making these connections, because the parents themselves may not see. This is usually the first time they've been going through divorce.
Right, it's
They don't.
completely
It's
overwhelming.
completely new.
Right.
So you know how I talked about those two labyrinths and
Mhm.
about standing like in those two labyrinths is really what you're doing, you Tina, right? What you're doing is you're kind of hovering above the two lines. You can see the path out,
Right.
right? They're standing in it. Like they're standing in it with a blindfold on. They don't even know what they don't know, right? They're not even sure that they're standing in a labyrinth
Mhm.
sometimes. But you are able to see, you've seen other people go through the path before. You can make those connections. You can brainstorm possibilities and options with them that they never would have considered before. And you can offer them a process that's flexible enough, right? That keeps them in control, that's ultimately based on compassion and is based on listening and communication. These are the things that people need so that in the end, whatever agreements they reach meet their actual interests, right? And
Mhm.
they're better than the alternatives that they have. And then they can sleep at night knowing that they did the best that they could do. And the only way you can do that is if the professionals that you're working with have some perspective about this.
Yeah, one of the other things that comes to mind too is situations where, maybe at the time of the divorce, there was not a diagnosis or a disability, right? And then after the divorce is finalized, a couple of years go by, and now all of a sudden, now we have a new autism diagnosis or a new disability that happened later. How do parents handle something like that? Right? What does that look like? So, obviously, there's parenting plan modifications. I think most people might not even know that that's a thing. So, let's maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, for the most part, when your marital settlement agreement is a contract, right?
Mhm.
It's an agreement that when both of you agree to change it, you can change it.
Mhm.
So as long as you're both agreeing on changes, you can always change it. It's your agreement. So, for example, even if what you agreed to was that Johnny was going to be with mom on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and with dad on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and you were going to alternate Sundays, if mom and dad decide, Johnny's going to be with dad on Sunday, whatever, you can do that.
Mhm.
It's your agreement. The only challenge arises is when one person wants to change it and the other one doesn't. You then need to have, hopefully, you've built into your agreements a dispute resolution mechanism
Process, right?
and a process. And so, for one common one would be if we disagree, then we will attempt to resolve it ourselves. And if we are not able to resolve it ourselves, we will attempt at least one mediation session before anybody files anything in court.
Mhm.
And then you would go and you would try to work it out with the help of a mediator or with a coach or with a therapist or some third party that you trust, that you will attempt that before anybody goes and files anything in court. And you can always, go and file it in court later if you really need to, but you're at least saying to each other, we'd like to set ourselves up to, we know we're going to have some disagreements coming down the road. That's inevitable. If
Mhm.
we can't work them out ourselves, we will try to work it out with the help of a mediator or a therapist.
Yeah, and even writing, I most of the dispute resolution sections that I write into parenting plans also have a second level after that first mediation, that if we still don't agree, that then we're gonna both need to go get additional information from the relevant professionals, such as, second opinion from a doctor or, meet with the guidance counselor or whatever it is, and then come back and try one more time now that we get more information. Because sometimes it's just getting off of those positions can be easier if there's other professionals whose opinions are considered
Right.
versus just
And
another.
it also requires both of you, or it helps if both of you appreciate just how serious it's going to be if you wind up lawyering up, how
Mm,
expensive that's going to be, how uncertain it's going to be, and how ultimately what you would be saying is, we need somebody else to decide this for us, which
right.
isn't always the end of the world. Sometimes you do need someone else to decide something for you. And when it's something minor, it's better to have somebody. I once saw somebody in a mediation agreement said that if we can't agree about this particular thing, we're going to flip a coin, and heads is going to be her and wife is going to be him. When it's a more serious thing that you really can't leave to a coin, um, yeah, building in a return to mediation can save you a lot of grief and again keep you in control of the outcome. And if you've already had one successful experience in mediation or in collaborative,
Right.
you may be more confident that you'll be able to do it again.
What would we say are sort of the key takeaways for parents to think about who are going through a divorce when they have a child with special needs or disabilities?
The first thing is process, process, process. What is the process that you're going to use? Know your options.
Mhm.
Get a consultation about mediation, get a consultation about collaborative divorce, big C, collaborative divorce,
Mhm.
right? And to the extent possible, work with professionals who have had experience and who welcome experience working with families who have kids with disabilities.
Yeah.
Whatever process you pick a process that, as much as possible, keeps you in control of the outcome. That enables you to have flexibility. That's a client-driven process, a parent-driven process, a child-focused process. Surround yourself with professionals, right? Who can answer the questions that you need answers to.
Mhm.
Be aware of the fact that there's no one professional, even the greatest lawyer in the whole world, who is going to know everything and is going to be in a position to be able to actually tell it to you.
Mhm.
You're going to need a variety of professionals to be able to help you see all of the intersections between your child's disabilities and all the steps of the divorce process. It's never going to be just one person. Even if you have a great mediator who is really tuned into all of this, they're going to need to bring in some other people to
Yeah.
help get you some information.
And I would say from my perspective, I think the other takeaway is to really try to focus on keeping the parenting plan for the children, and make sure that you're not only focused on your own needs and what you would like to see happen, but being realistic about what you're able to contribute, what your child can handle, and just making sure that, we're building in that flexibility to work up in a way that works for the child and not just for the parent.
Right. And to know that, needs change. You don't have to have a forever agreement on everything.
Mhm.
You don't have to have a forever agreement on everything. Certain things you do have to resolve, and that once you resolve them, they're not going to be changeable.
Right.
If you go and divide a retirement account, it's divided,
Yeah.
right? But things like how much child support is going to be, or how long it's going to be, or whether one parent is going to be working or not, or what the child's needs are going to be, and whether they're going to live independently or not. There's lots of things can change,
Mhm.
and we won't know. So you have to embrace the fact. You have to accept the fact that you're not going to be able to know exactly the way things are going to be down the road. There is a certain amount of letting go
Mhm.
that whether it's letting go of this idea that you can control everything, which is normal, natural, and it's extra, extra, extra important when you've been spending this child's whole life learning their needs and caring for them and structuring your life and their life in a way that's working and that's meeting their needs. And now you're in the process of having to change that, disrupt it, reinvent it,
Mhm.
right? Reimagine it. And that's very scary.
Yeah.
But there is a point at which you have to accept the fact that there's going to be a certain amount of unpredictability here. And you want to minimize that, but you also want to you want to hedge against it by building in some flexibility so that you don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't need to know what they are right now.
Yeah.
And that can free you up. You also are going to have to know that it may mean your role as a parent may change
Mhm.
and your spouse's role as a parent may change. And figuring out a way to do that at a pace and in a way that's going to work for the child is key. Stepping a little bit away from binary thinking and black and white thinking of it's all or nothing, it's 50-50, and that has to happen right now.
Yeah.
And backing up and going, wait, we can try something gradual, we can experiment and see how it goes. That is a perfectly acceptable type of agreement if it's okay for the both of you.
Mhm.
Frees you up. It makes things a little bit less stark, a little bit less scary, particularly if you're working with professionals who have helped other families through similar situations and can give you some perspective on how that might work.
And also realizing that it's okay if you try something and then it's not working the way that
Hmm.
you anticipated. Like,
Right. That's not a failure.
ladies, sometimes you might think, "Okay, this is gonna work," and then 5 months down the road, you're like, "Gosh, this really is not it's not working
Right.
for my child the way I expected, so let's circle back." But it's that mindset of this is not, like you said, forever. This is for now and for the foreseeable future based on today's circumstances. But next year, let's plan to meet again and see if, there's things that need to change. And just keeping that proactive relationship is so important.
Absolutely.
So, well, thank you so much, Josh. How do people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
So right now you can find me through the website of my mediation practice, which is New Hope Divorce Mediation. So I'm at www.newhopedivorcemediation.com. You can email me, Josh at newhopedivorce.com.
Awesome.
And we can put all that information maybe in the.
Yes, I will put it in the comments as well so that they
Yeah.
can find us. So, well, I really appreciate the time, Josh, and sure a lot of people will learn a lot from this. So,
Thanks, Tina. And thank you very much for seeing the importance of this topic and for all the great work you're doing in this space.
well, thank you. Appreciate it.